Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Brews and News. I am Tim Dennis here with my co-host Brian Hewitt, and this week we're talking all things hops with the one and only Stan Hieronymus. Stan, how are you doing today, sir?
Very good, thank you.
Very good. Now you're in the process of you're going to be making a move soon, right?
Yep, we're moving from Atlanta to Denver.
Okay. All right. How's the process going?
Well, finding a house in Denver is a challenge these days. Housing markets are a challenge everywhere.
Yeah,
finding a house anywhere is the three hardest, according to the people who will be making our loan on the next mortgage. So Denver, Austin, Texas, and South Florida are the three places where housing is the most challenging. And we say that, and it's everywhere. You know, it took us a day to sell our house in Atlanta.
Yeah, that's I've heard here of neighbors selling, and within hours of listing, they've got 10 offers over asking to sell their house. So kind of wish I was in the mood to sell my house, but I don't want to move. So
but then you have to buy a house.
That's exactly right. That's the thing. You got to go somewhere. So
move and then buy. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Terribly fun.
Well, Brian, what are we getting up to this week?
Yeah. So we're going to talk about exciting new hop varieties, new cryo technologies, hop terroir, hop blending, and also hops and hops and hops and hops. And but before we get into that, let's open up a beer. What's everybody drinking? What are you drinking, Stan?
Well, at this moment, I'm actually drinking water because I'm going to be talking a lot. Then after that, it's probably, I'm trying to think of the name of it. I probably open a can from a Hop Butcher for the World from Chicago. They make some really nice hoppy beers. So one with probably New Zealand hops.
That would be good. Applicable to this show, yes.
I haven't had anything from them. I've heard a lot about them, so I'll have to check them out. I've started a new day job, and our corporate office is in San Diego, with field offices in Dallas, Chicago, and Philly. So I just need to do the corporate tour there, and I could pick up some pretty good beer.
There and Dovetail, those are two to put super high on your list.
I follow Dovetail on Twitter. They're very active on there. I believe they're the ones that are always pitching the rock beers, right?
They are big believers in rock beer.
Yeah. Okay. I won't hold that against them too much. I was a little bit converted when we talked to what was the brewery with the Flint on Fire, Brian? Switchback.
Switchback. There you go.
Yeah, I was going to go look for my empties. That was it.
They love route beers, but you know they make a great Vienna and a great Helles, wonderful pills, just their basic lagers. So they'll have one or two route beers on. So they like to talk about it a lot, but it's not a gigantic part of their lineup.
Okay, all right, Brian, what's in your glass?
A little bit of a callback to a previous show. Remember that baseball show that we did?
Luau.
Ran across the street, realizing I needed some fresh hops, so I got the Luau Pog IPA, which is the hottest craft beer that sells in Truist Park. And I also, for a little national across the country flavor, I got a very tall boy of Deschutes. What is this? Royal Fresh Imperial IPA. It's about the right size, I'd say. What is this?
Yeah.
It's like 19.2 fluid ounces. Like, yeah, there we go.
All the hops.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, do you have more, Brian? Was there an and there?
I do. Actually, I brought this one out. It's not actually cold yet, but we may talk about the hops in this one right here. So I've got another IPA from Wild Leap that has a new experimental that we probably will be discussing later. So that's it. I always have too many beers. I always have one too many, Tim. That's my policy. What are you drinking?
Got to be prepared, man. Because we're doing a hop show, I had to get something appropriate. So I've got a Santa Claus Classic here. So.
Timely.
Yes, so I had to go with that. I'm going malty and boozy today. This is the first time I noticed that this is actually classified as a malt liquor. So the label does say malt liquor on it. So I should have grabbed me a paper bag.
It's not too late.
That's right.
Do not let your dreams be dreams, Tim.
Yes. Well, Stan, let's get into it. So the first thing we've got here on deck is Yakima Chief Hops engineering new Cryo Pop Cryo Pop pellet.
Cryo Pop, yeah.
Cryo Pop original blend. And can you tell us kind of what that is and what that's about?
Well, I think there are two parts of this. Is first, you see it's certainly not just Yakima Chief. It's every Hopsteiner. Their Trident blend is a big deal, and Yakima Chief has been doing blends for more than 10 years. And now BSG, Brewer Supply Group, has several blends out, and they're naming those with the idea, and I think we might have talked about this before, and it was Hopsteiner that did it, is if people stop and think about the elements that are particularly strong in certain hop varieties, and when you couldn't get them, when it was harder to get, you know, some of the really popular varieties, that if you could figure out and say this has a lot of this compound, or this has a lot of this other compound. So more specifically, if you're looking for something with geraniol, which is a monoterpene, or one of the thiols like 4-MMP or 3-MH. So you could take those parts and you could reassemble those and recreate Citra. You're not going to get Citra, but you're going to have something that has many of the same qualities of Citra. So that's part of the idea of the blending. And then the other part, what Yakima Chief has been looking for, and I don't know if you can flip that up, that slide I sent you.
I sure can. Let me get
Survivables.
it for us.
So about a year ago, Yakima Chief made a presentation when they started looking, because they really beefed up their lab. If you look at the videos, they might overstate it a bit exactly what they can do that other people don't. But they wanted to look and say, what are some of the flavor components that make their way into beer? So it doesn't really matter if it's something is there at the beginning if it isn't there at the end. So they were looking at the end, like they said, then they wanted to work their way backwards and think about that. So that's why they put together their Survivable. So it's probably hard for people to see this on the screen, but you can see, for instance, at the far left end, what's really large is a relatively new hop variety called Idaho 7, which is, no surprise, out of Idaho. But I think more of it's planted now in Yakima than it is in Idaho. It's becoming very popular in Yakima as well, and it has a lot of some of these survivable compounds, including a good chunk of the thiol 3, or the precursor for the thiol 3-MH, so that can give you the tropical element, a pretty fair amount of geraniol, which turns into a fruitier element when it interacts with yeast. So they're putting really three things together. You remember, it's only 4 years ago, right? 5 years ago. I think it's 4 years ago when they introduced the cryo hops.
Right.
And then they're saying we're going to be blending, and we're going to take in consideration everything we've learned from our lab with the Survivable. So those are the three elements that are going into the idea of Cryo Pop. But you can use it in different ways, whether you're going to use it, for instance, in the whirlpool. So it's still hot side, but you're preserving most of these compounds. Or if you want to use it at the end and it's already you don't need a biotransformation. And of course, between that, you can use it during fermentation. So that's the premise. I probably got some questions about this. Unfortunately, that's next week. I'm going to be talking to the people at Yakima Chief to ask them about, maybe they should have 3 different cryo pop hops. So one you use in whirlpool, one you use at the beginning of fermentation, and one you use at the end of fermentation. Not that I'm too difficult to work with.
Right.
Not at all.
Right. Not at all. So the chart here is just saying which hops have more of these compounds that'll survive through to the finished product.
Yeah, which is not to say that the other hops down there at the short end aren't really good to use too, but you're thinking, if I want to get what's in those hops, I'm going to use those more as a late hop. So at that far end, for instance, you see Azaka. Azaka is a great hop. was developed on Roy Farms. It gives you lots of that character. If you use it on the hot side in the whirlpool, you're going to lose most of that character. So part of it is, as we're developing more things and saying, use this hop at this time, get this out of it, understanding the compounds. Ultimately, they'd like to tell you about even more compounds, and then each hop, because it's still going to depend on that particular lot. So if you're getting your Idaho 7 from Farm A in Idaho, it's not necessarily going to be the same as the hop from Farm B in Washington.
Okay.
Down the road, they'd like to say, this is the way it is. I say that in Idaho 7 has been incredibly consistent from across the board in the Northwest so far. Its characteristics are really similar across many farms, but that's not true of every hop variety.
So that does make it desirable, having a lot of those survivables and being consistent. Which hops are most variable based on terroir differences? I know that some hops are grown all over the country and possibly other parts of the world. Which ones have the most variation?
So what you're going to see is Cascade is just incredibly different from one place to the other.
Oh, okay.
But there are so many other factors in that. It can be the age of the Cascade in the field. So that it's not, there haven't been that many studies. 5-6 years ago, the Japanese funded a study of Saz hops, for instance. And what they found is, that it wasn't until year 3 that they became really worth using. I mean, people are still doing it because in a field you're going to have a blend of, you're replacing. It'd be great if people just replace the whole field at a time, and that does happen. But generally, you're just replacing a few plants that get ill. So, there's a sweet spot between, say, years 4 and 10, where they're at their best, and they continue to be okay to 10 or 15, and then way out towards 2025, they're not as good. Those are the Saz hops. Further north, more rain, not as much sunshine. If you go to Tettnang, the Tettnanger hops, they have a much longer lifespan, and they can be viable up till, say, 40 years old. So it really depends where they are. But Cascade, for a variety of reasons, which is, first of all, some fields where you think you have Cascade, you've got a lot of cluster in there in the Northwest because that was already around. You get these mixes. They're different ages. They're treated different ways. They're certainly, when you get out of the Northwest, they're grown by less experienced farmers. So they're not getting that same thing out of it. When you go to Germany and you talk to a farmer who started working on the farm probably when he was 8 years old, and he knows those hops, he's known particular plants almost all his life, and knows what they need to look like in the spring. That's the time to train them, and what they need for water at the time when they're ready to pick and stuff like that. So it's such a farm product.
The terroir mixed in with the skill of the farmer there. So
the skill of the farmer is part of the terroir.
Kind of paramount.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. We do have a question here from Brent Langdon. He asked here on the chart, and I'll throw this back up here real quick. Asked if Centennial was on that list, and I got to figure the right button to press here.
There we go.
To hide Stan. So he was just curious where Centennial fell on that. So
it is on the list, and I'm trying to see. It'll be one. It's gigantic in geraniol.
Big in geraniol. Yeah.
See if I can find it here. I got to see a CH1. That's probably not it. Organic.
That was the
fruity
one, right?
CEN.
CEN?
Yeah, it should be Centennial. Should just be CEN, but I'm not seeing it. But
I'm not seeing it either. Yeah.
But it's definitely because their centennial listing. It was on. I mean, Geranio, which is an earlier chart, it's on there.
Yeah, it looks like it's not on that one.
Well,
it's so he did.
It's high in Geranial. It's certainly got a fair amount of 3MH precursor.
And Geraniol was the fruity edition, right? That's contributes a lot of fruit flavors too.
Well, you get the parts of Geraniol. First of all, per the name, it would not surprise you. It does smell like geranium.
Okay.
On its own.
Floral notes, right?
But when it interacts with yeast, then it creates citronellal, and citronellal has that sort of lime and citrus character. And then, of course, citronellal itself, which barely exists in hops, is you can buy those candles, and they're great they're an anti-mosquito.
Anti-mosquito
candle, as a matter of fact. So if you drink a lot of Two-Hearted Ale, then you will not get bit by mosquitoes, or if you do, you won't notice.
Yeah, you won't care then.
Because you'll be so hammered.
Got someone yelling at you here, Stan. Some troublemaker.
Hello, Todd.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good old Todd. Now, Todd is hosting Little Beer Fest at Good Word Brewing. Will you be around for that? Will you be able to attend that one?
We moved back to closing on our house a week, so I can make sure I was there.
Okay,
yes.
There you go.
Not that I care about it.
We may even bring your cooler back to you at that festival,
Okay.
man. Yes, yeah. We said we ought to put a bow on it and all that and give it to you. Here's a going away gift, your own cooler.
Yeah.
So
I think there might even still be some old Leipziger Goses in there or something like that still. No.
yes, yeah.
Just so there's no White Claw in it. Then we'll.
No, we promise. We promise.
We can make that happen there if you're sure. I mean, it's a long trip going back to Colorado. You might need some refreshing White Claw.
Something refreshing. Yeah. You know,
Stan, Speaking of that, Tim was probably going to the same place. Have you ever had hop tea? Are you familiar with this?
Well, he's probably thinking a different hop tea. You might want to
hop water, and there's some really interesting ones out there.
Yeah.
The Hoplark ones. We had them on the show this week. They make a hop water and they make a hop tea. I really enjoy the hop water. They've got a Sabro hop water. And they've got some hop teas, a black tea and hops, and I forget which one's in that. But the green tea, I think, is Citra, and they've got like a mega Citra bomb version of it. That's a chamomile version. I don't remember what hops in that. Do you remember, Tim?
I don't recall which ones were in
I don't
there.
even know if they say it on the label, honestly, with the chamomile ones. So the Citra bomb one was really good. I think that was green tea with that one, Citra and green tea, and the Sabro hop water, very coconutty, very enjoyable, very nice. If you've not tried that,
I can definitely see that.
Yeah. Well, Stan, we kind of touched on it. Talked about it a little bit there, the hop terroir, but how much are they paying attention to that these days?
Not enough. I think. I mean, it's hard to. So you're not if you're. It's specialized, but for a brewer, it's an opportunity to make a connection and say this is who grows my hops, and it's an agricultural product. So you're not going to do it with Galaxy because you don't know the people who grow your Galaxy. And you wouldn't anyway, because Galaxy is actually, and I know you have this on the list later, is you don't go to a farm and select Galaxy. It's all put together. Unlike you can be, for instance, other half, they in their Simcoe selection, amazingly enough, in which they go in and they do this selection blind. You're going into the process, and you've got they'll put samples from maybe 10 farms in front of you, and you go down and you rub them, which is to bring up the oils, and you'll smell it. And amazingly, other half has selected like Simcoe from 3 years in a row from the same farm.
They know what they like.
Unknowingly, just going in blind and trying them. They've right,
and they go back. This is what we want. This is what we're smelling. Vinny Caruso at Russian River is getting his Amarillo from like the same part of a field at Crosby Farms. Now he goes in and selects it, and he's going there going, oh, that's from that same field. So look, that does make a difference where it is. A lot of times it's harder for brewers to talk about that, but they could be, because every lot of hops you buy, depending on how you buy it, if you let somebody else take the hops and break them into 1 pound bag or multi-ounce bags, you're not going to know what you're getting. But when you're buying them from a reputable dealer, it's going to have a code on that tells you which farm it's from. You can develop a relationship with that farm and say, I want to continue to get the hops from there. You can find out about them. You know, this is definitely at a smaller scale.
Right.
But there are 9,000 breweries in the country, and, you know, half of them, the cutoff point, so half of them make less than 450 barrels a year. And that's a much smaller amount. And you can begin to have those relationships with your customers and with the people who supply. And you should have somebody else on to talk about supplying barley, for instance. Not my specialty.
Okay.
Okay.
You know, we talked
actually,
a
no,
lot of-
hops pretty well consume all my brain. So
that's it. All the room you got right there. You know, we've talked to several brewers that mentioned, you know, hop selection and getting those hop contracts and what a difference it makes in their brewing, you know, being able to go out there and select them. And, you know, we had a local brewery here, you may have heard or seen some of it, that made a comment about issues with their beer because, you know, when they were new, they're like, we get the last pick of hops. We don't get to get out there and get it. So, you know, people kind of ran with that, made jokes about it being, you know, an excuse for issues, but there is reality to that fact that if you are big enough to get a hop contract, then you get to go out there and brush them in your hands and smell them and pick the best of the best.
Well, you're not just picking the best of the best, you're picking what you've used before and what you appreciate. Mm-hmm. So rather than like at Block 15, which is in Corvallis, Oregon, and, you know, he was saying that when, you know, his idea is we got big enough, I get to make selections so I don't get the shit hops anymore. I think he may have used that word. And what he discovered is it's more, I'm just not looking for the best. I'm looking what is best for my beer. And you should understand, when Larry Sador, who's now at Crux Fermentations in Bend, was a brewmaster at Deschutes, they would have, like, I don't know, 6-8 people go do hop selection. They'd bring in one person new each year. And at the time, Mirapon was a gigantic beer from them, and that's a Cascade beer. And they go in and they'd rub it.
I said I know that one well. I cut my teeth on Mirror Pond and Black Butte Porter. Yeah,
and, you know, a great expression of Cascade. Some people, you know, I talk about, like, when Cascade was just getting known in the UK, so 15 years ago or so, and people have Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and they didn't like it. Of course, that makes 0 sense. And then they would have Mirapon and they go, oh, this is an awesome hop.
Such a great beer.
But anyway, Larry would take the people and they would rub this Cascade and they would go, awesome, this is the best Cascade I've ever smelled. And he would go, that's true, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the Cascade that smelled like last year because we have a brand.
Right.
So, you know, that's part of it as well. And then you get to know, you may decide to go directly rather than going in and making that selection blind at particular farms. And you appreciate the way they do that particular work. And you can see, you know, we're talking about IPA hops, obviously. And if we were talking about some, quote, lager hops, so like Sterling and Saint-Étienne in the U.S., which are wonderful hops, which were developed to be like the, quote, noble hops, and they're barely grown now. So you would know what farm that's from. If you're buying Saint-Étienne, it's coming from Gauchy Farms. You're buying Sterling, it's coming from one of about 5 different farms in Oregon, and you can go and appreciate exactly what those people are doing.
I've never really thought about the fact, like you said, they have a brand, and There's got to be a little bit tough for a brewer to go out there and to try a hop and be like, this is the best of this hop we've ever smelled, but
we can't use
it's
it.
not our brand. You know, it's not,
It's a lot easier now because you would still get that hop and it would just be like the 14th IPA you put out.
Exactly. Just put it on the list, add it to the IPA list there, right?
I like the quote that I saw in your latest hop queries. The hop selection isn't simply about avoiding inferior hops or finding the best hop. Brewers are looking for unique properties and also want to make sure a particular beer remains true to brand. And I'm like, uniqueness and consistency are the big thing for a lot of brewers. And I would never have thought that. I would have been on board with what Tim said. You just want to find the best of, like, I want to find the best Citra in the world and just put that in my beer. It's like, nope, you want unique and you want consistency. So that's that's pretty cool. I would have never crossed my mind, but I'm not a brewer. So
Stan, another question here, kind of interesting thought on it. And we're actually going to dive into new hops here in just a minute, but I guess let's go for it. This is a good segue to get into that. Are there any good, interesting low alpha hops out there? Because it seems like those high alphas is something a lot that they're breeding for now.
Well, I think the two parts of a lot of people, the hops I just mentioned, Sterling and Santiam, which is, so Santiam, the way to pronounce it when you read it, it's hard. It's like Anti-M, except Anti-Am. Those are both really terrific hops, which were developed in the 90s. Coors fell in love with Sterling. AB briefly was behind Santiam. The reason they abandoned it was it stores horribly. And at the time, they were all cone brewery. If you've ever been in an AB brewery, particularly St. Louis, which is gigantic, and to be down below the brewery in their hop storage room, not the storage room, just sort of these are going to be the hops we're using in the next 2 or 3 days. It takes an immense amount of space.
Staging area, basically, right?
Staging area.
Staging area, exactly.
The green room. It's the green room.
And now you can put months of hops because they're in pellet form in there. Well, when they stored that hop, they realized that it did not store at all. Not an issue now because they're processed better, because they're pelletized and they can be preserved. And you go back and these hops have the same quality of, say, Mittelfrüh or Saaz, which for American brewers are hard to get in good, fresh condition. That to me has been a breakthrough. That's really helped Halfway Crooks, that they get a direct shipment from a good farm in Germany. They know those hops are fresh, coming from a farmer who really knows what he's doing. That's a hard connection for most breweries to make, as opposed to if they were using American grown hops. But in terms of new names like Contessa, which is from Hopsteiner, so you can look at those. If you're talking about a low alpha hop that's going to act like a quote noble hop, which is a tricky term to use, but those landrace varieties, which we can name quite simply as Saaz, Tettnanger, Spalt, Hersbrucker, Stritzelspalt, and Mittelfrüh. That's 6. That's all. If you're looking for hops like that, and a key is you can give them a look and say if the beta is higher than the alpha, and the alpha is nice and low. So let's say the alpha is like 3 to 6, and the beta is a little bit higher. They're going to have many of those same characteristics. So Contessa is one of those out of Germany because they are breeding, understanding that climate change is real. Only 20% of German hop growers have irrigation systems. So when heat rolls up and drought is an issue, then their yield goes way down. So those landrace varieties, which were selected more than 500 years ago, they're going, what did you do with my climate? So they struggle. So a classic hop like Spalt, which is a great landrace hop. So originally the Germans bred Spalt Select, which has a better yield, nice hop, but not quite like Spalt. More recently, the next breeding was to take Spalt as a mother and come up with a hop that is almost a dead ringer for Spalt, but it has a much better yield, is more drought resistant, needs less pesticide, and that's becoming in the EU. And you got to think if we're coming here eventually, you realize these plants grow more than 20 feet into the air. You're spraying them up in the air. You're throwing a lot of pesticides into everybody's air. So that becomes more of an issue as well. So they're breeding for stuff like that. So Diamant, which is a new hop out of Germany, is another replacement hop as well, just for what has come before at the low alpha. And then a lot of people know Strata, and the next hop coming from Indie Hops, which is the one that paid for the breeding of Strata. Right now it's called IHO33, and it'll be showing up in a lot more beers this year. It's being commercialized, and it'll probably get a name. Again, that has been bred with the idea of being a quote lager hop, but in this case, not quite like those classic hops like Mittelfrüh and Saaz, which have that herbal character, because they're recognizing that as more people come into beer through IPA, they're coming in to fruitiness, and herbal becomes a little too exotic for them.
Too crazy.
I'll
Now,
swing back
you
around,
mentioned that, them reacting, saying kind of what happened to our climate, and that I know you'd mentioned that was kind of proactive on some of the climate change, some of the growth for climate change. Is it more proactive or reactive?
Well, some of these, in the case of Diamant, which also comes out of, when you're breeding a hop, you're taking a mother, putting her in the field, and then you're putting your pollinating her with particular males. In that case, it's a good breeding male that is which they felt at 20 years ago. They didn't understand the hop genome like they do now.
Mm-hmm.
So we're beginning to understand more, where we can say at least the markers are known for disease resistance. That's a marker that's easier to see than others. Yield is much harder to see. Aroma and flavor, which is what we're all excited about, we're not there yet in figuring that out. So more than 20 years ago, yeah, they understood this then, and Saaz, they understood this then as well. Hopsteiner's been looking at this,
yeah,
and it's not just. The other part is just practical. You're already looking for a better yield. Why in the space of Earth, when I can produce maybe 12 or 1,400 pounds per acre, and hop growers talk in terms of bale. A bale is 200. So I can produce 6 or 7 bales, or I can produce 30. 16, which would be 3,200, 16 or 18 bales per acre. Idaho 7 in some fields in Idaho is getting in that 14 to 16 range. That same amount of space, that same amount of spraying of pesticides, that same amount of water, you're getting more than twice the amount of hops.
And
it seems like
it's got a lot of really good characteristics based on that chart.
Yeah.
Yes.
It seems like too that you were talking a little bit about during the terroir section about the farmers growing this, and we know that there's farmers in many areas that are trying to grow hops there, but it seems like that would be kind of the opposite impact as far as climate change goes. If you're going into a place that's hostile towards growing hops or not really friendly to that, then you really have to do a lot to get them to take to that area, correct?
Yeah, so they're doing things in Florida and claiming it'll work, and I'm not convinced that it will. But a next
exotic places like that, like how that's going. But
carry on. I think the concern now is understanding the characteristics that will, as hops would have to continue a march north because of climate change that'll make them work, or concerns about drought, and this is certainly true in Europe where there's less irrigation. Is more breeding will take place that find the strengths within an area, but people are going to have to grow hops for that area, and brewers are going to have to pay a little bit more for them because it's never going to be as efficient. So that's, again, they need to talk about what makes this different, what makes it better. They're going to have to make interesting beer with it, but it's a way to grow hops, say in New Mexico, where hops do grow wild. And so Hopsteiner's looking at that and understanding the genome in those hops, what makes them drought resistant. So it's an opportunity to put, say, a hop that's really good at growing there, doesn't have that great flavor yet, but you put it with something else that is determined. Maybe it's a hop that has lots of geranium, or maybe it's a hop that has the thiol. So you can put those two together. So you can find the strengths in those regions. It really helps if hops were already growing in those regions, which they are in most parts of the country, and not to pick on Florida and Southeast, but there aren't hops there.
Right.
Actually,
they were working on
actually
programs for that, though. Yeah.
They're
ahead,
working
Tim.
on it. We'd heard about a place, I think it's in Alabama, that is growing hydroponically. And
so this question came up, and this is like 10 years ago. I was actually with some English brewers with a hop farmer in Yakima, and they brought that up, and he's going, there are other products that make you more money in that setting
then hops, right? If you're going to set up the hydroponics, make it worth your while, right?
Exactly.
Hey, Tim, you know that Wild Leap was using those Alabama
Yeah, I remember that one. And I do know if I recall correctly, they said they were getting more yields out of them because they could have the grow lights on them and feed them, so they were getting more yields than what would normally be expected from the farm.
They were getting 3 harvests a year or something like that.
Well,
yeah,
that's the tricky part, is what you're getting out of the hop and what you're going to get out of the hop over the course of 10 or 15 years. These are questions we haven't answered yet. So.
Do hop plants, I don't know the right wording for this, do they lose their efficiency, over the years? Are they still going to produce the same quality cones in that, or is there a time where you sunset them?
Yeah, that you need to sunset them, and
okay.
It's going to depend upon the variety and where it's grown and how it's been treated over time, and how it's always tricky, particularly when I talk about, say, Anheuser-Busch and what happened with their hops. But as a farmer who was growing a lot of Willamette for Anheuser-Busch in the early aughts, for instance, said that they never wanted their hops to be as expressive. So they wanted them picked early. And the same thing was true in Germany. And we kind of operate under the illusion that they always loved middle fruit from Germany. It sort of went back and forth. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. They were really interested, for instance, in Santiam and then Saphir, which came out of the same breeding as Diamant. And Saphir is a hop that you see of that. So for Saphir is the dry hop in Firestone Walker's Pivo. So that's when people have had Saphir, you've had it.
Okay.
And it's a great hop, and it's a really good replacement for middle fruit. But at the end of the 90s, early aughts, Sam Adams, they made a big deal that they were using middle fruit. And so AB had sort of backed off of middle fruit. And of course, August Busch III didn't put up with anybody doing something better than him. And they went back and sort of went back to saying, we're going to grow middle fruit, even though it's impossible to grow. And we're going to pay these farmers more and stuff like that, which they continued to do until 2008, until they just yanked the rug out from underneath them. But by then, it wasn't AB that yanked it out. It was AB InBev, which was a different company altogether.
So it's not possible to grow that here on this continent, the middle fruit.
It's really a struggle. There are it grows okay in northern Idaho on the AB farm. So when you get farther north, that helps. I'm not sure which Hallertau that they're using now. So again, Crux, which uses a lot of sterling in their lagers, he's using some locally grown Hallertau, but that gets confusing because what's the source of it, where did it come from, which clone did it come off of.
Interesting stuff. We got Keith's got us a thumbs up here for the hop talk.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
There we
gotta
go.
love the hop top.
Enjoying the hop talk. We are as well. Now
He's
go ahead, Brian. Go ahead,
I was
sir.
going to say, he had already mentioned Diamant is one of our noted new hops out of Germany. I don't think we've talked about Tango yet. That's another new one that came out of Germany that you were talking about in Hop Queries.
Right. Well,
issue, right?
And Tango is so the most grown aroma hop in Germany is actually Perle or Pearl, named after Pearl. And it's from it was released in 1979. And Tango, again, is an example of a hop that yields better, more drought resistant, needs to be sprayed less. And that's every reason for for farmers to begin using it. And the funny part of it is, so through a period that the Germans were naming most of their first release of those hops. So you have Hallertau Tradition, that's meant to replace Mittelfrüh. But it's a lot different than Mittelfrüh. To a lot of people, it's not. It's a word I've heard is it's more aggressive. Mittelfrüh has this mellow element, and Tradition sort of this wacky bitterness that's not as pleasant. And then Spalt Select, so they just would name that after the parent hop. And then they went to a period where they were naming them after precious jewels. And that's why you had Saphir and Opal and hops like that. And now we're coming back with Diamant. And they've got another hop for Tettnanger. I'm forgetting the name of it right now. So it's like a year ago, January, International Hop Convention or whatever. And Walter Koenig, who oversees the hops, is going, we're going to bring this variety out, and we'd like to find an interesting new name. So the interlude in this, and then meanwhile they broke with that when they brought out their flavor hops. Mandarina Bavaria, which they call Mandarina because it's supposed to be like Mandarin. Huelmelon, because of the melon characteristic, and Hallertau Blanc, which had certainly, and it shares some of the flavor compounds of Nelson Sauvin. So it's that same thing, that Blanc character. Yeah. And so they name those after the flavors, but now going back, they do Diamant and the other, and they're going, and so a hop farmer who's actually Florian Seitz, and it's Seitz Farm that provides the hops for Halfway Crooks. And they might have been drinking some beer at the time. And he said, these are just boring names. You need to give them more exotic names. You should name them after dances. And that's how Tango got its name.
Good idea.
There you go, Tango. I don't know. I like the names they sound boring to those guys. To us, they're exotic. To me, Mandarina Bavaria, Hallertau Blanc. I'm on board with these. Actually, I like all those hops quite a lot. I think they're really nice hops.
Certainly the giant home run was naming Citra. Yeah. That was absolutely perfect. And there was so much effort. So the next release from HBC that's 2007-8. They released Mosaic in 2012, and they knew it was going to be super popular hop. And they worked really hard. They were picking a name, and they're going, no. And then they would check the trademark, things like that. I always found it amusing because, and this is obviously super hop geeky, Mosaic is a hop disease. So they named the hop, and they called it that because it's a mosaic of flavors. That's the idea.
Interesting. Okay.
I love the name. I really, really like the name of Mosaic. I can't even imagine the hop not being called Mosaic. Love that. I had no idea it was a disease, but nice call.
Yeah.
As you know from our show, Stan, Brian and I are quite skilled at naming things, so we really think these hop farmers should start reaching out to us.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Stan, we got another question for you here. Here's a hard one, probably. We got Coach Rogers here wants to know, do you have just like an all around? What's number one on Stan Hieronymus's list?
The new flavors out is hard to say because it's really hard to screw up a beer with Citra. Citra's great. But before Citra, I would always say, but my favorite hop for American ales was Centennial, and it's still a great hop.
That's
Maybe
quality
my
hop.
favorite. But and then on that landrace side, it's Hersbrucker. I just love Hersbrucker. It's aromatic, and it could be a perfume. And
What's a beer with Hersbrucker in it? I'm curious because I don't know that hop per se.
Well, certainly Halfway Crooks uses Hersbrucker in many of their beers. If we can think back to Goodword earlier, if Todd's still around, I did a small beer with them. It's like 3.6% ABV. Which we call Lunar Gravity.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the idea it was low alcohol, and we finished that with Hersbrucker. Urban Chestnut Stammtisch is finished with Hersbrucker. Obviously, you've entered this other strange niche world of Stan, where it's sort of the things I like.
The Twilight Stan.
Oh my God, I'm in the Stan zone. I'm in the Stan
Yes.
zone.
Well, Stan, one thing I was thinking here quick is these aren't hops people brag about putting in a beer. Like, we know the ones that have a Citra or Mosaic or things in it, but there's a lot of hops out there just quietly doing their job of being awesome, right?
Right.
And before Citra became the hotness, wasn't kind of Centennial the hotness before Citra became the hotness? Wasn't
in
there
this brief zone
that was super hot?
Yeah, the crazy thing. So this is a hop that's released in 1990, and we know Two Hearted Ale becomes a bigger deal, but Two Hearted Ale is around forever without becoming a big deal. It's not till late aughts that it really takes off for them, and then of course Centennial is the hop in Sierra Nevada Celebration. So you would think there was a lot of it out there. And in 2005, they're only growing 500 acres of it, as opposed to like Citra is now more than 10,000 acres. And then Centennial blows up in that period. But even into maybe not quite the teens, when Centennial took off, then the farmers could not keep up. So Yakima Chief, if we go back to talking about blends before anybody was talking about blends, so Yakima Chief sold basically what they called a Centennial blend, which was a combination of Cascade and Columbus, trying to emulate the aroma and flavor of Centennial. So yeah, Centennial had that period of burning really bright. And right now there's too much Centennial out there. Not enough people are appreciating it, which is just stupid. But
that's a shame.
Yeah,
because it's still a good hop, but Citra is awesome. It really is.
The other thing is Centennial is it's more variable, and it's not as it moves further south, it's tougher to grow, so it can really vary in quality. And Citra is certainly driven. I mean, it's great in beer. Its yield is not as good, so you're going to have to spend more for it. It costs farmers more to grow that than say Mosaic. Mosaic is at least an 11 bale hop, and Citra is more like an 8 or 9 bale hop. Ooh. So that can make a gigantic difference to somebody's bottom line.
That's why all these IPAs are so spendy.
Spendy, yeah. Kind of parallel to Brett's question on the best all around hop. Maybe easier or harder to answer, I don't know, but let's say you were designing your perfect IPA, not saying the hops, but what characteristics do you like in it? Like the bitterness and the flavor profile. What's your perfect IPA?
Pliny the Elder.
Just there. We don't have to go any further. Get a Pliny.
We want your exact levels of linalool and geraniol and myrcene.
No. Yes.
Can we get a chart? Pliny the Elder. Have any more visual aids? And that's a double IPA, but that's sort of tricky. So or Two Hearted, but those are older school, so they don't have the Citra. You can make a really good, and I'm trying to think of it, and it's again Hop Butcher of the World. I just had a beer from them, which is more West Coast, and it does have the New World hops in it. So earlier at the beginning of the year, as a matter of fact, Russian River, when they brought their 5-barrel brewery, their pilot brewery online, Vinny made the inaugural ale, and the inaugural ale, of course, is the beginning, lays the foundation for Pliny. That was their anniversary beer, the first beer he brewed, and then they released it a year later. And so that's only C hops. This is before Simcoe, any of that. And Simcoe's super important for Pliny, and Amarillo's important for Pliny as well. And you have that, and so I had this beer that was very West Coasty, and it made me think immediately of having the inaugural ale, except as much inaugural ale has some certain rough edges. You have to appreciate those rough edges. So you can take these new aromas and flavors. Mosaic, of course, is a daughter of Simcoe, so a lot of times Mosaic gets a little danker. Doesn't have it loses the berryness. Sometimes it has a lot of berry. Sometimes it doesn't have as much berry. So those.
Pliny's a beer that, and the beer nerds, people love to make fun of it's a week old. That's too old. Whatever. And when you see people talk about trying Pliny, reactions are all over the board. I will say this, having tried Pliny several times now, I remember the first time I had it, I was so excited that I actually got to try Pliny, and fortunately from having good friends and going to bottle shares, I've had it several times, but the first bottle I had, I think, was about a month old, and I'm like, this is good. This is good. Had a friend fly out, and he flew back, and the next day we got together with, like day old from the brewery, and I'm like, this is a totally different beer. And then I went to GABF and had it on tap at Falling Rock, and I'm like, this is a life-changing beer. This is just it's a perfect beer, and it's not necessarily, it doesn't have the crazy trendy hops. It's not hazy, juicy, all this and that. It's just a perfect drinkable IPA, and having it fresh on tap there. If for anyone watching, if you've been underwhelmed by trying a Pliny, fly out to California now and get you one on tap, and I think you'll have a different opinion.
The other part I would say, when you have it now within the last year, of course, if you got somebody traveling with it, it's let it be warm. There are a lot of things you can do wrong, but the effort they've gone to keep the quality in the bottle is just astonishing. We get in the geeky level, we're talking about we're no longer talking about just dissolved oxygen. We're talking about TPO and stuff like that. And so they're really driving to keep that quality up and extend the shelf life just a few more days for every part of it. So you buy it because within their footprint, which is pretty small, California, a little bit of Colorado and things like that, they want it to be in good shape there.
That reminds me of the survivability of Maine Beer Company. Of all things. I've seen a number of their beers on the shelf here in Georgia, and they haven't looked very fresh, but when I've opened them, I've been surprised, and they have done incredible things at Maine Beer Company to keep dissolve oxygen low and do a lot of things to make it surprisingly good at longer periods of time. And it boggles the mind, because I know other people are not maybe not cutting corners, I don't think, but for some reason, the Maine Beer Company beers, their IPAs and their pale ales particularly, they last longer than I think that they probably should, and I'm surprised by that. So there's something going on there. There's magic.
You're right. Those are really nice beers. If you're just killing time sometime, you look on YouTube. If you look at Creature Comforts, maybe their YouTube channel, they post sometimes, or they're doing an IG Live where they talk about how many steps they're doing to check on Trop. It's crazy.
Yeah,
and that's what you do with that little bit of thing. It makes me feel, because I just reject it because it's so fresh here in Atlanta. There's no reason to ever, you check the cans, and if the can is 12 days old, I go, why am I buying this? Because I know I can find
it anywhere.
And in reality, what they're doing, if it has been cold, then it's easily good. at a month or so.
Yeah,
maybe longer than that. But storage is such a big
key.
factor.
It really is key. Yeah.
We talked to Creature Comforts, and they were mentioning that of course there's a laboratory test, the things that tell you all the statistics and that, but they said absolutely their number one is sensory, and
Yes.
that they sit down and they said they've got a group at the brewery that they've talked to and worked with, and I don't know if trained is the right word, but maybe guided on, hey, these are what we're looking for. And when they taste, they'll have one that is a day old, a week old, 30 days old, 60 days old, 90 days old, and they're looking at, does this hit our profile for what Tropicalia is, and where are we seeing these changes at these points? Because if we know what a good Tropicalia should taste like at 30 days, then if someone says they have a problem and we try that at 30 days
Right.
and it doesn't taste like this, then we know there was a problem there. So
Right.
so much goes into making a good beer there, right?
I mean, yeah, for real. I mean, it doesn't hurt to always make sure you put your best foot forward with everything as much as you can. You can't make the retailers put all your stuff in the refrigerator. In fact, Tropicalia sits in pallets on the floor most places that I go to, and it's assumed it will sell out before it gets stale.
Right.
And I think that's another thing they do, Brian, is they work with their retailers to see how much they do turn out. And if someone is selling 2 cases a week, they're not going to sell them a pallet, because they don't want someone to have that bad experience. Stan, speaking of the freshness and the hops here, we got another question from Brett. Just wiped you out, Stan. We'll get you back soon. But so talking about the harvest there, and how long after harvest before it starts to affect the flavor of a hop?
Almost immediately. They start to rot without being dried. Then you need to be drying them inside of 12 hours. But what you're seeing is, because people want, these fresh picked hops, and you're when it's picked, the hop is 80% moisture, and you want to get it down to 10% moisture. So when Sierra Nevada sells their Centennial, quote, fresh hop beer, that means freshly dried. That's going to a kiln, being dried to 10%, and then it's going directly to Sierra Nevada. A lot of places making a fresh hop beer, it's going from the vine within 12 hours into the kettle, which from a brewing standpoint presents some challenges, because you're adding all that water. You've got to calculate, and you let it sit there too long, and that beer just gets like brewing with grass. It's like sucking on blades of grass. But there's such excitement about these. So one thing Sierra Nevada did, and they made that Hop Hunter beer, which was to go in the fields, and before those hops were 12 hours old, they were taking and they were using technologies used in mints, in harvesting mint, and just taking the essential oil out, and during the course of the year they could add it back into the beer. And now there's a company in Montana that does that same sort of thing, of taking the fresh hops, distilling the oil, and you can add them back into the beer. CLS Farms in Yakima is involved in another technology where it's a way to package those fresh hops and send them off where they stand up longer. As it is now, you pretty much, if you wanted to do it in Georgia, which people do, you need to have your hops shipped overnight. They're packaged in Yakima, they're coming in overnight, and it might be a little bit dry, but the idea, they're still wet hops is if you think about them going in the kettle, is a meaningful term, whether or not you're going to dry them a little bit.
Right.
Then they'll stand up. What Sierra Nevada does, for instance, with Centennial.
When Brian and I were homebrewing more, we did a wet hop beer one year, and we had them overnighted on a Thursday to receive Friday for us to brew Saturday morning. And when we got them, the box was damp, because they just loaded them into a cardboard box, so the box was damp. And when we opened it up, they were just really bright green. By the next day, they'd already started browning. You know,
Right.
I mean, I guess it's kind of like a piece of fruit. You know, once you get it opened
Right.
up there off of that, it's you know, you cut you an apple and settle, or cut your avocado, settle on the counter for 10 minutes, and you're already going to see it change it.
At the moment they're being removed from the plant, it's still a healthy, viable plant. It's still an ongoing process. They aren't, you aren't letting them go to that part, say when grapes are hanging and getting whatever it is grapes do, the age and add flavor. So it's still, and that's why they can deteriorate so quickly.
Yeah. Well, Stan, I think we may have mentioned these casually, but I don't think we went over the exact list. We've talked about new hops, experimental hops, and that. You told us you've got 3 potential contenders for Rookie of the Year of new hops this year. Can you tell us what your contenders are and why each one deserves the honor?
Well, from Yakima Chief, you have Talus, which is everywhere, and people have been using, and that's the one.
That's in Talus
that Brian has, and
that's in there.
Talus is a daughter of Sabro, but people should not expect the same exact characteristics as Sabro. Sabro is like, this wild animal just knocking China off the shelf and everything like that. It is a very dominant hop. Talus plays better with others. So it's a hop for people to start thinking about using in a blend. And it's going to be everywhere because Yakima Chief hops are. Then you've got Eclipse out of Australia. So those will start to be coming into the States because the Down Under harvest just finished. It won't be that easy to get. But certainly what the Australians are hoping that this catches on like Galaxy, so they can pick you can't, in farming, you can't have just one hop, because that, no matter when it begins and ends, that hop needs to be, it's going to have a favored time to be picked, which is going to be about a week long. And it's hard enough to do now when you've got 5 to 6 weeks to harvest your hops, because it takes all this infrastructure. You're spending $1 million on a hop picker. A hop picker is not real. You think of it's like this machine that does this. It's the size of a room, not a room. It's the size of a large barn with all this stuff going on inside of it. So that's expensive. And then it goes to these kilns where it needs to be dried. So you need to use your infrastructure at 5 or 6 weeks at least out of the whole friggin' year, and then they just sit there. So you need stuff that picks at different times. So Eclipse gives them that. People are really excited about the flavor and the aroma out of it, and it's still tropical, New World, a little bit of white wine character, stuff like that. And then the third one is, I'll say it in American first, which is Nectaron, because it's called Nectar of the Gods, and that's the way we would say that. And then Ron Beetson is the breeder who created the hop. But if you talk to the people in New Zealand, they say Nectaron. So you can take your choice how to pronounce it. And I think there'll be a fair amount of that around. I've had actually had some single hops and some other beers with it. And it's different than Nelson Sauvin, and they want it to be as big as Nelson Sauvin. Unfortunately, there was a hailstorm on Boxing Day in New Zealand, and it like wiped out about 5 farms. I mean, so this came at a time when the hops develop, it's called burring, and that's when the cones are first starting to develop, and it just came and knocked the burrs off these hops. So, and there were quite a few Nectaron fields involved. So I'm not sure how much there's going to be. One thing NZ Hops, which is a co-op in New Zealand, plans to do is they've got a partnership with a company in England to just extract. I think they're distilling actually the essential oil out of these hops. So like I talked about before with Sierra Nevada, you can add the oil back in to flavor it, and so you'll get more out of each hop. So they'll probably see some beers with each of those, and then it just comes down to what the brewers choose to do with them.
They should sell that oil to direct to consumer. You take your little vial with you to the bar and touch up your beer a little bit.
So I don't.
They probably do, to be honest with you.
There is a company. I forget
Straight Linalool.
Yeah, just boom.
You can do some. Most of those you wouldn't want to do. When I was at Creature Comforts, they opened because they were messing around with 4-MMP, and 4-MMP is what gives you the tropical aspect. 4-MMP is gigantic and Citra, Mosaic, those sorts of hops, and it is so potent that it's like a jar within a jar. So just open the top of the outer jar, so you've only got the other thing, and swirl it in the room one time within their lab. And of course, we're all wearing masks, and you feel like you stepped inside a litter box. It was so catty, and that's what 4-MMP smells like in the raw state. It is so catty. So some of these compounds, for instance, 4-MMP, you smell at 6 parts per trillion.
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
That's where you can perceive it. That is comparable to a pinhead in an Olympic-sized swimming pool.
So you would think if we were that sensitive to that aroma, that it has to be important for us, evolutionarily speaking, to recognize for some reason or another. I'm not sure what that would be. Maybe it's
get them tasty beers.
Our ancestors needed to know where the freshest, most tropical beers were at a given time, and they had to run to them as quickly as they could. I don't know, but one part, you said 6 parts per trillion.
Yeah.
My God! All right.
So but you got to realize that this was a bad flavor in beer until 2008. So for 10,000 years, it was bad, and now it's great.
That's why they needed to know. The cavemen needed to know so they could turn their nose up at the bad. They didn't even have to get close to them. They didn't even have to get close to them there. So just stay out of the way.
I was going to say, of the experimental hops, quick rundown, flavor-wise, Talus, Eclipse, and Nectaron. Flavor-wise, are these all basically variations on tropical?
It's pronounced Nectaron.
Nectaron.
Yes.
Nectaron. I like it.
Yes, tropical's an important part. Exotic's an important part. Different fruits are going to be a factor in them. Distinguishing between them, I think over time, I'm not a gigantic fan of single. I mean, I enjoy some single hop beers, but I think people can almost always do better. And that's, I don't know as much about Eclipse, but I've been drinking beers with Talus for quite a while. And, when it's adding with something else, it can bring out, it can enhance other aroma and flavor in the beer. And that's why Talus is sort of exciting. So you wouldn't say that the Talus single hopped IPA would excite you as much, but you'll begin to understand that it works really well with the others. And I think Nectaron is that same sort of thing. Philosophically, that's sort of Ron Beetson, who's been breeding hops for 30, 40 years. When you go back over time, they're always looking, and this goes back to this is the way the Germans talk about bitterness. They're looking for beers that are harmonious, and that's what a perfect hop for a brew is, thinking how it fits in with others. And so the hop is not doing all the work. it's there. It's one part, and that means you need some brewer skill. And of course, it's a pretty simple thing. Anybody. So Sapwood Cellars in Maryland, they put out a series of beers they call cheater beers, and those are the ones with Citra and Mosaic and things like that. And like they say, anybody can make a great beer with these hops. And then they make these beers that they call cheaper hops or cheaper beer. Well, they call the beer cheaper hops, which is combining hops that do not cost as much, but still give you a lot of interesting flavors. I think there's an intersection of those two. Some expensive ones are fine to use, but it's most important is putting those hops together to create something new, and that also fits, that isn't jarring, where you don't go, oh, now I tasted the Citra, now I tasted the Mosaic, now I tasted the Nectaron. Instead, it becomes something entirely new.
Get that harmony there. The Harmonious IPA. There, use that name. There we go.
That's a good name.
There we go.
That's a good name for hop blend too.
See, that's it. Harmonious.
Yeah.
There's got to be another language to say it in where it sounds a little cooler, but we can play off of that. So we'll figure that out. So Stan, you've got some big articles coming up as well as a great newsletter. You want to tell people kind of what you've got coming and about Hop Queries?
Well, Hop Queries is a newsletter that I do once a month. It's free. You can go to AppalachianBeer.com, which is one across the screen spelling, which is good because it's always when your name's Hieronymus and you name a website Appalachian, you spend all your time spelling stuff.
Correcting it.
It's funny. So I'm also doing, at first it sits behind a paywall at Brewing Industry Guide, then Brewing Industry Guide, which is the brewing side of craft beer and brewing, and then they're in print. And I just actually wrote a story a little bit about climate change and the old world hops and what new world hops might replace them. And then I'll be talking to Yakima Chief about Survivables that'll be out in June. And then some further things about all these other new products that are out there, either semi-new or coming out, where people can just do the oil additions. And does that still taste like beer, for instance? So those are some of the short-term things I'm working on.
Be interesting to see. Good times. Stan, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Always a great conversation. We're definitely looking forward to hanging out with you at least one more time at Little Beer. Are you going to be going to check beer days at Good Word?
Unfortunately, I was planning on it, but we had something come up, and I'm tomorrow morning we'll be hitting the road and driving up to DC.
Okay.
So I am disappointed, and I'm curious. I think I had the opportunity to grind almost all the hops they got in a while back to use some of those which are going to be in these beers, and they're pretty exciting. So the second weekend, because it's like a 2-week thing with the Czech beers. So that next weekend we definitely plan.
Yeah, I know it's going for a good while there. So yeah, it'd be nice to have that. I always love Halfway Crooks. They're one, we've talked about two of my favorites, Good Word and Halfway Crooks. Love both of them. I could easily just go and drink, anything on the menu. So it'll be a good time. So, well, awesome. Well, everybody out there in streaming land, thanks for joining us. Thanks for the questions. We'll be back next week. Stay tuned. We may change the day. Bob Townsend gave me a little grief for not letting you sit on a patio at 8 p.m. on a Friday sipping a beer. He said that's what you should have been doing, but we may look at a more user-friendly day and time for this. But this is Brews and News, Beer Guys Radio. Make sure to check out our regular show, Beer Guys Radio Craft Beer Podcast. This week we're talking with Hoplark. Next week we're going to be talking with Oscar Blues head brewer Juice. Stan, do you know how to say Juice's last name?
We don't know.
Drapeau. We're going to be talking to the Juice, though. So
we will find out how to say his last name
We'll figure it out. We will figure it out. But once again, thanks everybody for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.